One. Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing great. This is Jacob, your coach with English at the Vet. And tonight we're here with Dr. Jessica, a veterinarian, to answer a few of your questions that you've had about what veterinarians do, the life of a vet, the practice of a vet. Jessica, why don't you introduce yourself to the class?
Alrighty. I'm Dr. Jessica. I currently practice small animal medicine. So that's mostly dogs and cats, and the occasional small pocket pet like gerbils and hamsters and so forth. Um, in Rapid City, South Dakota. This is little JP. He just turned 5 months old and does not want to go down for his nap. So he is joining us for the moment and may occasionally give his opinion. He's already helped me with multiple cases when I have to go in on the weekends. He gives his opinion, and it's very smart.
He's very smart. Opinions to give?
Previously, I practiced actually mixed animal medicine, so horses and cows.
What is mixed animal medicine compared to
so it's horses, cows, sheep, goats, in addition to dogs and cats. So your farm call and farm type animals, in addition to more of your house pets. And I also worked ER, so emergency medicine, for small animals. When you do large animals, so all your farm animals, you automatically do emergency calls for the ones you take care of. So it's just, that's kind of built in, as opposed to small animal, and sometimes you're doing just regular stuff and sometimes you're doing ER.
Okay, makes sense. So it's just a mixed practice, seeing big animals, small animals, pets, and other emergency large animals at times.
Yep.
Good. Large animals. What's your experience with large animals?
I started riding horses when I was 10, so I've been involved in horses for, oh Lord, almost 30 years.
Almost 30
Gracious,
years.
I'm getting old. And that was a large part of why I became a veterinarian. I had a horse that I loved very much, who taught me a lot. And I was actually able to have him for 19 years. And so he influenced my way I practice and how I help talk to clients with all the stuff I went through with him.
Mm-hmm.
You're okay. And
he interviewed too.
And I've also trained multiple horses too.
Good. So tell us also, this is for the English, from the English perspective, where do you live? And how would you?
Excellent question. So I'm originally from the South in the United States, which is more North Carolina and Tennessee for me. And then
talk like this, and she's one of those people.
Yeah, basically. And
yeah,
and where I try to make my accent as easy to understand as possible. We're not okay. Here, you want this instead? Burp cloth is better. And then I moved kind of to the middle of the country, which is South Dakota.
How do you think you sound compared to people in South Dakota? How does your accent compare to people there?
So my accent, I have to really articulate sometimes, because especially when I get really tired, my accent really comes out. Most people here have more of a Midwestern accent than they do like a Southern accent for me. Mm-hmm. So it's
kind of qualify what that means, the difference
between
accent and a Southern accent.
So a Southern accent is more, and I initially grew up in Georgia, so my accent's kind of a combination of multiple places. So it was actually influenced by Scotch, Irish, and English settlers primarily. And it has more of a rolling kind of lilt to it. Mm-hmm. And words kind of roll into each other, as opposed to here, they tend to be much more, the speech pattern's a little bit choppier, so to speak. it's not harder to understand. It's usually, for most people, it's easier to understand a Midwestern
Mhm.
Western accent than it is a Southern accent, from most areas in the world.
That's something a lot of people do say, that Midwestern accents in the United States are the easiest American accent to understand. So the way
Definitely.
I speak in class, the way I'm speaking now, I always talk about clear and consistent communication. My
Hmm.
accent kind of leans towards, it's not exactly Midwestern, but it leans towards the Midwestern
Hmm.
accent that you hear because it's so clear. So that's a good example. It's good you said that too. Well, good. All right. That's enough about the English accents. We're here to talk about veterinary medicine, and Dr. Jessica is going to take some time to answer your questions that you had for her throughout this week. So, what to expect? I divided the lesson into the video recording, into three separate parts. We'll do some personal questions, general vet questions, and then some lesson related questions. The lesson related questions, of course, are related to our lesson this past week on pets. So here we go. Dr. Jessica, what is your most memorable experience or event as a veterinarian? What stands out to you?
So when you gave me this question, I had to think about it a little bit because I'm fortunate that I've practiced for 10 years now,
Mhm.
which is amazing when I think about it.
Mhm.
So I've gotten to see and do a lot of different things.
Mhm.
Um, and when I thought back to one thing that made a huge impact for me was when I was what we call baby vet. So I was just out practicing. I was in my second year of practice, and I was doing mixed animal medicine, and I was on call for the weekend. And one of our good clients at the vet clinic called, and he had a cow who couldn't give birth to her calf. They'd gone out and checked on him, and she was having trouble. She was a first time mom, so that's called a heifer, when they're first time moms.
Heifer's the
And
first time mom.
yes, so they become actually a mature cow once they're in their second and beyond with their calves. Um, and if you're gonna have trouble with any cow, beef cattle in particular, so your meat cows,
Mhm.
it's gonna be your heifers. So our farmer was fabulous and very responsible, and he was always checking them. So it was a Sunday morning, and he was checking them before he went to church, and found one mama having trouble. So gave me a call and packed up my vet truck. Vet trucks are usually like a pickup truck, and on the back of it is a box that's got all kinds of medicine and equipment that we can use in the field, because we don't at this particular clinic did not have the ability for him to bring the cow to the clinic. So I didn't have like working chutes or anything like that. So everything we did had to be done in the field, quite literally. So he had gotten a halter on her. And fortunately his cows were pretty well handled. Some of them are wild and crazy, and it's very difficult to handle without chutes, and ways to contain them.
And those were,
So
you said, that's the word?
I'm
Shoots?
sorry.
You said without shoots?
Correct, shoot.
And that's
So if you've ever seen any
CHUTES, right?
pictures of um cows and kind of what looks like a cage press,
Mhm.
and their heads kind of stick out, it's a way for us to keep them safe while we handle them, and also
That's
keep
the
us
shoot.
safe.
They're inside of the shoot,
Yes.
their head sticks out, and it protects
Hmm.
from them as you're treating them.
Right.
This makes
Because the
sense.
heifers are always these Angus heifers, which is a type of beef cow,
Mhm.
um, or at least 1,000 pounds. And when a 1,000 pound animal is in pain and hurting, they'll accidentally hurt you. Um, but fortunately, his were pretty gentle. He'd gotten a halter on her, and because we were in the middle of the field, she was tied to the back of a pickup. So that's always entertaining.
That's amazing.
Um,
That's not something you think
so
about. Yeah, you don't think, again, veterinary practice, we talked about pets mostly this week.
mhm,
It's talking about large animals, and it's a completely different world, isn't it?
it is. It's a completely different world, and able to get her where I needed her. She wasn't even standing up anymore. She was hurting enough. She was laying down, and I was able to palpate and feel the calf was stuck.
Mhm.
Um, and unbeknownst to my farmer, this was my very first call by myself for a calving problem. And so I was going out, I was like, oh gosh, I've learned all these things. I know how to do this, but I've never done it like by myself. And
Baby vet, as you called yourself
baby vet.
back then.
And so and I'm not that big. I'm about 5'6" or so.
Mhm.
And before him didn't didn't weigh a whole lot.
I mean,
Um,
well, it happens to everybody. This is natural. This is normal. Yes.
uh, so my husband went with me, and my husband is about 6'2", former bodybuilder and quite broad and tall. And so when we got out of the truck, I'd not met this farmer before, and he assumed my husband was the vet and I was the tech. And he looked at him and he was like, "That would be your doctor." He
So
just looked at me like,
expecting
"Oh
the big
gosh."
ex bodybuilder guy to be the one who's going to pull this cow out, then looks over
Right.
at you, much smaller, not
It's like,
bodybuilder.
right.
Uh-huh.
And so was able to assess her and palpate, and the calf was stuck at her shoulders. So basically the mama's pelvis was too narrow.
Mhm.
And the calf had gotten wedged, because you always want calves to be born with their heads and down and their on top of their front feet.
Mhm.
So she'd gotten wedged in, but she was still alive. And these are emergencies because if they get stuck in there too long, they die. And it can cause major problems with mama too.
Mhm.
So it was a very hard pull, actually. In the hundreds of pulls I did after that, this one still ranked as a pretty hard pull. So I was able
Very
to,
first one too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I was able to put what we call calving chains, which sounds like a terrible thing, but it's actually they're smooth, safe chains. But you carefully wrap them in a specific kind of knot over the front legs, and then you put those over the front legs, and you attach it to what's called a come along jack. Because they're wedged in so tight, you carefully help wedge them out and kind of wrench them out very carefully with lots and lots and lots of lube and helping to position so that it doesn't stress mama and it doesn't stress the calf.
Mhm.
Um, and this calf, when I got her out, and I actually got her out very efficiently, it was a perfect pull. Um, she was about 100 pounds, which is big,
Sure.
even for a beef calf,
Mhm.
especially for a heifer. And she was alive and well, and got up and nursed, and um, Mr. Gordon was the farmer's name, and
Farmer Gordon.
Farmer
You get
Gordon,
that from a book?
and
Isn't there a famous novel that has a Farmer Gordon? It sounds like one of those names, though, doesn't
yeah,
it?
it does.
Farmer Gordon.
And so he was very happy, very impressed, and all that. So it's like, whew, okay, that went, fake it till you make it. I acted like I knew what I was doing. It was all under control. And inside, I
This
was
is a
like,
good
oh
idea.
my gosh, what am I going to do if I can't get this calf out? Like, this is not, you can do C-sections in the field, but doing them on cattle in the field is really, really hard to do. We do it on sheep and goats all the time,
Mhm.
but cattle, you really need a chute system to do C-sections. Um,
Cattle are quite big. This is the reason. Yeah,
yeah.
strong.
So it's, it's thing. And so, um, what was really funny was the next day, he called my boss and was like, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know that Dr. Jessica came to the farm yesterday. She did a really good job. I really wasn't sure she was going to know what she was doing because she was looked so young and she was so little.
Mhm.
And I looked her up on LinkedIn, so he like actually Googled me and the whole nine yards. And he's like, and then I saw that she had just graduated, but she really did a good job." And I was like, well, that's awesome. That was one of the first times a client had actually gone out of their way to say thank you, which doesn't happen very much. And to this day, still was the best thing ever.
I think there's a question later that we can talk about that a little bit too. The thanklessness of the veterinary help.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing.
Mhm.
Um, and lo and behold, as I grew as a veterinarian, we always have this running joke. They still live in Tennessee, of course, and now I'm in South Dakota. Um, but we had the most bizarre calving emergencies with them. And most of the time they would actually occur on Valentine's Day, for several years thereafter. So we just always said it was our Valentine's date. So that was fun. And I'm still friends with them to this day. And they became personal friends. And I still do give him advice and so forth, but the sense of accomplishment that very first time of going, okay, I know I've been trained to do this. I know what I'm doing, but actually going out and doing it, because it's also a dangerous thing. It's not the safest thing to do. And it going well and actually having somebody say, you did a great job when they weren't really sure you knew what you were actually doing.
To throw on your superwoman cape and then go out there and do it, right?
Well, in
Just
this
throw
case,
it
in
and
it,
go.
like big old calving sleeve,
Yeah, that's it. That's your
all those
superwoman
things,
cape.
the
That's what
version of a cape. So that was wonderful, and we still laugh about that 10 years, 8 years later. So
yeah, well, that's an excellent, memorable experience. I would say that something like that's hard to beat,
yeah,
And again,
yeah, and
everyone
the fact
notice the
when the casket's
detail
up, it's like the
that
best
she
thing ever.
calls us in. Think about your own experiences with your jobs and the things that you do and your day-to-day lives that you take for granted. Think about these situations that you've been in that you remember. Why do you remember them? Why we talked about memory a few weeks ago. What is it that makes these memories so strong? Again, she recalled this story with so much detail. What about your own stories? Think about those. Let's go with question number 2, Dr. Jessica. What's the most exotic animal you've had in your vet clinic?
Um, so it wouldn't necessarily be my vet clinic, so to speak. But when I was in school, I went to the University of Tennessee, which is in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Mhm.
And we were the veterinarian for both the Knoxville Zoo and for a big cat sanctuary. So that's lions and tigers. They actually took in retired zoo animals, animals that had been confiscated for being illegal from all over the country. And there are a lot of them. It's called Tiger Haven. And so sometimes those big cats would need to come in to the vet hospital at the vet school. Sometimes we would go out, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go out and help sometimes too. That's an experience. Most of these guys are like not pets by any stretch of the imagination. Some of them had some human contact, but many of them were creatures that had been gotten illegally for the most part, kept as cubs, and then they got too big and rambunctious and got into all kinds of trouble. So they weren't always the friendliest creatures, and they are wild animals. And I know we're going to circle back to a question about that later too.
Yes, exactly.
But the first time that I ever saw one of them come in was really cool. It was a big old tiger, big orange and black type, classic striped tiger. And they had them, and they bring them in the back of a van, and they're in these huge not container crates really, but they have huge iron, kind of like the old fashioned zoo animal look. Trying to figure out a better way to describe that. I mean they're ginormous. And they were
How would you
always
say it's different from a cage? If we used a cage, the word cage, how is this crate different from a cage?
so I guess when I think of cage, I'm thinking more of like a cage where I keep dogs or cats in the vet hospital, which are going from anywhere from smaller for like kitty cats to bigger for your dogs, to small type areas. This was literally the size of a small car, and made completely of solid like steel.
It's solid. We're not talking bars of steel. We're talking
We're talking, or well, sorry, it was bars of steel.
Okay.
Yeah, and they were a solid, I mean, inch and a half diameter, 2-inch diameter bars. I mean, all the way around. You do not play around with these children. They will get you. They always came in sedated because, they always came in sedated because, that's less stressful for the animal, and you do not want to stress the animal, and it's also safer for everybody involved. But getting to see those, and they had their own special entrance and teams that worked with them, whole 9 yards. As a matter of fact, funny side story. My former bodybuilder husband would visit me when I was in vet school,
Mhm.
and he would volunteer at the vet hospital while I was in class. And they loved having him in exotics, and they tried to make sure they scheduled these big cats to come in
While he
on the
was there.
days he was there because he could maneuver the cages.
There you are.
And when
That's
they
why.
got on and off the vans,
Mhm.
and it would take him, and it would normally take three other people, and he's like, I got this. Um, he forgot the first time he did that he was highly allergic to cats, however, and that definitely applied to tigers. It actually was worse.
Okay. So you,
So yes,
the big cat's worse than the small cat, the
oh,
allergy.
right, yes, it
Mm,
is actually.
that's interesting.
So, but that was probably the most exotic animal I've gotten the privilege of working with.
Yeah, big cats are huge. We talked about these a little bit this week, that some animals are able to be domesticated well, and some animals maintain their wildness, their wild habits, their wild genetics more than others.
Definitely, definitely.
I think those big cats are definitely a good example of those. Let's go with question 3. What made you choose? You've sort of touched on this, but expand just a little bit. What made you choose to become a veterinarian? If you had a chance to choose again, would you still have become a vet?
So I always loved science.
Mhm.
Um, and my dad was a physician, so I grew up kind of in a medical family,
Mhm.
loved medicine. And but grew up loving animals too. And in high school and college was trying to decide whether to become a human doctor or a veterinarian. Ultimately decided on a veterinarian for a couple of reasons. One was at a veterinarian, we're not tracked, so to speak, and contained to specific areas as much. So I have been able to do so many things: dogs, cats, horses, cows, sheep, goats, hamsters. Um,
Big description.
Whereas in human medicine, once you pick one area, more your cardiology for your heart,
Specialty.
yeah, you specialize, which you can do in veterinary medicine as well. You can absolutely specialize. Um, but I didn't want to get bored, honestly, and I wanted to be able to do lots of different things. Um, I also was able to do my master's of public health with an emphasis on zoonotic infectious diseases. So those are the diseases between people and animals. Um, and so my my background, kind of so to speak, and my experience in human medicine also let me that informed my work in my master's as well. So I've been able to use that quite a bit. Um, and I'm never bored. I can go from a complicated medical case, like I've got in the hospital right now, to a routine spay, to an emergency C-section, and then pop into a room and go vaccinate a brand new kitten. So the days are
A
never
lot of
boring.
variation in what you're able to do
Yeah.
as a veterinary doctor. Mm. And you would say, again, doctors that treat like a family doctor or a general practitioner, would you say they are less varied now than what they were in the past? What they treat, how they treat? Are they more
In the
confined
in the human
to
component,
the human component?
yeah.
Because we talked a little
Um,
bit about this in some classes. We have some doctors who probably hopefully be watching this video later. And some people have said that medicine's changed so much in the
it
past,
has.
just say the 20
It's changed a
years.
lot.
And that's one thing they've lost, is that certain autonomy they had to treat
Mhm.
patients the way they want to, the way they feel they need to. Sometimes they're
Yes.
limited by the rules of the organization they work for, even.
And insurance is a huge problem too. Um, we actually
Not
were
to get too
talking
deep
about
into the
that
politics of
in
it, but yeah.
right. We were talking about that a little bit actually in my family the other day,
Mhm.
um, about how human medicine has changed. As far as like when my dad practiced when he was first there, there was a lot more autonomy. And he's fortunate that he's been able to keep a lot of that in the positions he's held. Um, but that it's definitely altered as far as, in some ways that's not a bad thing. I mean, when you've got set guidelines and protocols and so forth, that's how we advance, by doing research, doing studies, going, okay, this is what our most current literature review says.
Mhm.
You know, this is the best way to treat this. But also having your experience and your knowledge base and what works in your hands, and where you are, you know, around the world or in that particular area of the country.
Mhm.
Because there are definitely variances for sure. Um, and being allowed to make decisions, you know, within protocols, but outside.
Mhm.
Um, that has been something veterinary medicine has needed to do and is working toward. We have a lot more research, even in the last 10 years, and guidelines and so forth, because you want to practice at the top of your field as much as possible all the time.
Like any field, really, you might say.
Yes.
You want to practice at the top of your field, follow the guidelines, follow the research, be on,
Mhm.
to use a phrasal verb we've used, on top of the research so that you are current and you're able to practice with the best. The word that's coming to mind is world-class guidelines, which is kind of a
Mhm.
throw around word in business, but you get the idea when I say that. World-class standards is what you hear a
There you
lot
go.
in business. And
And
this
in veterinary medicine, we call that gold standard.
gold standards. There you are. World-class standards and gold standards. This is a useful phrase to know. Put that there too. And just in case you haven't noticed, I'm assuming when you're watching the video, this will show up very well, but I'm keeping a vocabulary list here on the left-hand side. What I'll do later is I'll print this, or I'll place this in the PDF, and we'll provide this as a download in Kajabi Circles. So you'll be able to download this list and remember these words yourselves. If you're taking notes, that's always great. But if you're not taking notes or you've forgotten, you will have a list of these at the end. So don't worry about that. All right, Dr. Jessica, let's go on to question 4.
Sure.
What is the hardest part of your job?
Oh, and I had to think about that one, to be honest with you. Most people, when they ask you this question, assume that you're going to say putting animals down or euthanizing animals.
We use those words with
That,
you.
ironically, to a certain degree, that is not actually the hardest part. Um, James Herriot, who was a very well-known English veterinarian back in the 1930s, who wrote a lot of books. Who, if you've never read them, I highly recommend them. They're fabulous.
Says James Herriot.
James Herriot.
The last name.
Um,
Spell the last name.
it's oh,
H-A-R-R-I-E.
you know I can't spell out loud, Jake. Uh, Harrott, I believe.
O-T-T. Okay. All right. So in case anyone's interested, James Herriot, that's the author.
Oh, they're fabulous. And what's fun about that is veterinary medicine hasn't changed that much. The A lot of the large animal stuff is actually has not changed much, because that's just the way it is.
Mhm.
But it's more, he goes into the practice and the heart of veterinary medicine. And he's well known for saying the animals aren't the hard part, it's the people.
It's the people. Okay.
Um,
Would you agree now that you're a practicing vet of 2
yes,
years? Yes.
100%. So the hardest part, for the most part, would be, like, for example, if I have to give bad news, if I find a cancerous mass in a dog who does happen to be older, but isn't at the end of its life necessarily,
Mhm.
and it happened to belong to an older gentleman's wife who passed away, and this is the last connection he has to his wife.
Yeah, linked memories, the connections.
Those
Mm.
those are hard. Those are very hard.
Mhm.
Because most of the time you've established a relationship. But to me, that's very important. And when I practice, and wanting to try to find a way to break that news as easy as possible, but not sugarcoat it, so to speak, too much, get to the point.
That's a good word, sugarcoating. What does that mean, Jessica? What
So
does
it
sugarcoat mean?
making it far less bad, almost to the point where it doesn't seem bad necessarily.
Toast.
Um, and particularly being Southern, that's something that we're very much taught.
Mhm. This is a
The
Southern
way that,
cultural thing. This is definitely a
yes,
cultural
very
value in the
much,
South. Mhm.
very much. you're very careful how you phrase things. You do not want to offend or upset anyone. And when I moved to the Midwest, people are much more direct and blunt.
Right. Okay.
And so that's been a little bit of a learning curve for me, honestly. But those are hard.
Yeah, I think we would all,
Other,
almost everyone, I know I would assume that having to put an animal down and having to just face the family, see the family, say goodbye to the animal, that would be very difficult. But, you know, this situation, and specifically talking about an older gentleman who has his last memories tied to this dog
Mhm.
that he shared with his wife, and then putting that dog down, it's a whole reintroduction of grief for that
Yeah,
individual. So you're
yeah,
not just telling them bad news, you're also having to do a little bit of human counseling at that point, I'm sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
And fortunately, side note, University of Tennessee actually founded veterinary social work. The field of veterinary social work was actually founded at UT by one of my professors, Dr. Elizabeth Strand. She's an amazing human. And they actually did put us through quite a bit of training, actually, to help. And that has been invaluable for me. So kind of a shout out to them and all that they've done to prepare us for that was very helpful.
Seems like the often ignored people side of veterinary practice, right? It's
Yeah,
veterinary bedside manner, if you will.
yeah. So they went through quite a bit of training with us for that and how to help people cope with that grief and how to be there and learning kind of to read the room as far as how someone wants to proceed. Some people are very direct. They don't want to talk about very much. They just want to do it and get it done. Um, I had to euthanize an animal yesterday, who had bone cancer. I was not their normal vet, one of the other vets in our practice is their normal veterinarian, but she went downhill very quickly. And they asked to go ahead and have it done yesterday. So we absolutely wanted to do that for them. Um, and after it was over, the dad asked me, do you have to do this very often? And I was like, about every other day. And he was like, I don't know how you do this.
That's a lot. I don't,
And
that's frequent. Every other
it,
day,
it's a lot.
not once a
It's a
week,
lot,
it's every other day. That's 3 times a week, roughly.
at least.
Oh,
And sometimes multiple times in a day, depending on the situation. Especially when you work ER, that's a whole nother realm.
well,
Um, but the way I like to try to explain it is, to me, it's the last kind thing that I can do. To me, it's a privilege that I am able to help an animal pass without pain as in as much a controlled manner as possible. Um, it is sometimes hard when I'm having to euthanize because a family can't afford treatment. That is hard, and I know we circle back to that again here in a little bit as well. Um, but I will tell you from experience that there are fates worse than death, and it is not wrong. When people are like, "Hey, I've diagnosed, for example, a diabetic animal," and the family is, that's absolutely something that can be managed, but takes quite a bit of work, especially on the front end.
mhm.
And when folks are like, you know what, I work 14-hour, 15-hour days, I can't do insulin twice a day, and the animals, they're not doing great because we found out what's wrong with them. They've lost weight, they're not eating and drinking correctly, so forth, too much, too little, depending on dog, cat. Um, but to say, okay, you know what, this is not the best for your family and your animal being a part of your family. And then financially, they may not be able to do it either, and go, it is okay to say this is not feasible or best, um, and to give that animal a dignified passing and not suffer. So walking with people through those decisions um, is hard, but
Has to be.
it's the people aspect of it really more so.
Some of you this week have said this during class when we talked about putting an animal down, to putting an animal to sleep, or euthanizing an animal. These 3 different ways we can say this. This process, like you're hearing Dr. Jessica say, it's a very personal process.
Hmm.
And what's right for one person might not be right for another person, depending on the situation.
Hmm.
And a lot of you have said this, so here you are from the doctor herself agreeing with you. So yeah,
Yeah,
we had some
definitely.
interesting discussions about this in classes this week.
But
Let's,
it's odd. It bonds you to your clients. Um, I've
mm,
had more people come back and thank me, which
mhm,
always feels a little bit awkward sometimes,
mhm.
uh, for being there and walking with them through that and so forth. Um, so
It's a very special relationship that you share,
yeah,
right? And it's not
yeah,
something you share with, not something I'd say regular people share with many other,
right,
right? And especially
yeah,
you're doing 3 or more of these a week.
yeah,
That's a lot in a year's time. That adds up
yeah.
very quickly. What is the most enjoyable part of your job? If that's the hardest, what's the most enjoyable part?
Oh, let's see. There's lots of really good parts to being a veterinarian.
You can hear in her voice. Listen, just talking about intonation for a moment. If you replay that section, just rewind back real quick and listen to the way she said that. You can tell she loves her job, and what you're
I
about to
do.
hear is something she truly loves. Please.
Oh, a little one's gonna wake up. I'm sorry, y'all. What I
That's
think
okay.
you're okay, Nugget. So everybody expects you to say puppies and kittens, and of course, puppies and kittens are fabulous.
Mhm.
And it's really neat too. Not so much here because I haven't been practicing here, but for about 2 years. But back when I was in Tennessee and I'd practiced, for 8 there, walking with people through their animal's life, and then putting that animal down, and then seeing them get a new puppy or kitten, and going through that with them um is always neat to kind of see that circle of life for sure.
Mhm.
Are you gonna have to go see your daddy?
If you do need to stand up for a moment, take a break. It's okay. I can stop, pause the video, and we can
Yeah.
back.
Give me
It's no
one
problem.
second.
Yeah, of
I
course.
feel like he's
We'll
about to
pause
have a
right here
meltdown.
and we'll come right back in just a moment.
Okay. Give
Not a
me just
problem.
a second.
No
Hey,
trouble.
you're right.
All right, here we go. Back after a short pause. We'll let Dr. Jessica finish what she was saying with question 5. What is the most enjoyable part of your job?
So definitely full circle with going with families as far as going with, walking with them through an older animal, having to euthanize that animal and then see them get another puppy, or kitten. That's always really neat. To walk through that with them and be able to watch that new little kiddo grow up. Um, Another part would be taking a very challenging, like, medical or surgical case, um, and being able to triumph for, even if it's a short period of time, but be able to allow a family to have their animal for a longer period of time. Even if it's short enough just to say a goodbye, but make that easier. But especially when I can win and triumph for a couple more years, then I'm really happy.
Good. So just having that triumph or that rewarding moment where you experience along with the family the emotion of improving the dog's life, or the pet's, we'll say the pet's life,
Yeah.
and giving them more time with their loved, or let's use the word beloved, their loved
There you
or
go.
their
That'll work.
beloved pet. Excellent. Let's change gears a little now. And these are some general vet questions, mostly about your job and about some of these are specific as to what to do. So let's see. Why is the dog's nose always wet? This is an interesting question. I feel like this is something we always talk about, but
Right.
it's not common knowledge, is it?
It's not really. And I actually had to pause and think about it for a second because it's not something that I routinely, have at the forefront of my brain.
Mhm.
A lot of folks will come in and be like, "Oh, my dog's nose is dry and hot," and they'll think they're sick because of that. Well, different breeds actually have different, moisture content, so to speak, in a nose, and it also goes is affected by age, so to speak.
Mhm.
So an older dog's nose will often kind of dry out and have like a little bit of more rough, and that's still considered normal,
Mhm.
in most cases. But for the most part, when you've got like a younger dog, middle-aged dog, especially if they're a longer snout dog, like a Labrador Retriever or a Collie,
Mhm.
as opposed to like short-nosed, bulldog. We call those brachycephalics, that have
I
those
won't
little
type
short.
that one down. You can listen to that word again if you have questions about it. Ask me later, but
Um, but you'll notice that some of the longer snout dogs, especially the ones that are used for scent work, whether that's in security or military or police or anything like that, their noses are always wet. And the reason for that is dogs have so many sensors in the, like, it's astronomical. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it is insane how many
and
scent
astronomical
receptors
means
they
a
have.
lot. There are a
A
lot.
lot, a lot.
Mhm.
Um, and when their nose is moist on the inside and on the outside, those receptors work a lot better. And so they constantly have a little bit of clear, kind of almost runny discharge through their nose.
Mhm.
And you'll notice your dog will lick at their nose on a fairly regular basis. And that is literally to keep the outside moist. And also, since their nose is kind of running and they don't have hands to wipe their nose, they lick their nose. But it also lets them taste and sense in a different way. So if they've smelled something, and it's adhered, so to speak, to those receptors on the inside of their nose,
Adhered
and then
to the receptor in the nose.
yeah, and then it kind of drains out, so to speak, and the dog licks it. That's another way for them to reinforce that sense of smell. So they get it not only in their nose, but in their mouth.
Mhm.
So that's just one of the really cool things about dogs.
That's super interesting. Yeah, that's something again,
Yeah.
like I knew to an extent why a dog's nose is wet, but I'm not sure I would have recalled without you mentioning it that they reinforce that
Hmm.
scent by tasting it also. So scent and taste
Yeah.
are very strong senses, of course, for dogs and learning. How about our second question? Is chocolate really bad for dogs? I've heard that mushrooms are too. What about chocolate and mushrooms?
Alrighty. So chocolate. Um, we have what's called the chocolate wheel. Um, and it's this fabulous little tool that was put out by ASPCA, which is kind of like one of the big humane societies in the United States. Um, but one of the neat things they do is also have a toxicology or toxin um, service. So we can actually call them, or if you've got things you want to find out, you can actually Google that and find out all kinds of stuff. But one of the neatest things they ever did was make the chocolate wheel. And I should have thought to bring mine home from the clinic
Hold up.
earlier.
While you're talking, maybe I can pull one up and I can show it here on the screen.
Um, it's this really neat overlay, and it goes from whether it's white chocolate, whether it's milk chocolate, or semi-sweet chocolate, or baker's chocolate, and the weight of the dog. So why the type of chocolate matters, I think we're back asleep, um, is the amount of cocoa that is in the different types of chocolate. And it's the amount of cocoa that actually matters. And it also matters to have the different weight of the dog.
Mhm.
So it's actually a correlation and a calculation between the amount and concentration of that cocoa powder and the size of the dog. So it can be anything from just a mild tummy upset to kidney failure, seizures, and death. Um, and so if somebody calls and they say they're 100-pound Labrador Retriever ate a single little tiny Reese's cup, which most people I think know what that is. It's a little chocolate and peanut butter treat that's real popular.
It's a brand, the Reese brand, the Reese
Yep.
cups, like bright orange
Um,
packaging with chocolate, usually on the front, and then a
yep.
yellow Reese logo.
Um, so that's milk chocolate. The dog weighs 100 pounds. I'm not concerned. I'm like, it's fine. If I have a Chihuahua that eats a fudge brownie, I'm real concerned real quick. And I want them in the hospital as quickly as possible because I want to try to make that dog vomit and get everything out. And if it's been too long, then I hook them to IV fluids and I start fluid bolusing to try to protect their kidneys because they're asking for kidney failure at that point. So
So this is why
it's a
chocolate,
range.
it's the cocoa in the chocolate that
Mhm.
makes chocolate dangerous for dogs. You all can look this up on your own too. I can't find anything better than this at the moment, but this is an example of that chocolate
Yeah,
wheel.
that's it. That's the chocolate wheel.
And what the inside part, the darker, the brown portion, it spins, I guess. You can
Mhm.
turn it and it
Yep.
aligns with the numbers on the outside for the, I believe that says the weight of the dog on the outside.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that's super neat.
So it's a very useful tool. I have one on my bulletin board at my desk.
No, I can't move it.
It saves you time from having to actually calculate it out when you need to make decisions quickly.
Mhm. That's a neat little tool. And that's ASPCA, if you see on the wheel, ASPCA, the Animal Poison Control Center, ASPCA. Again, acronyms. Acronyms in English, I'd say acronyms in many, many languages. They're used all over the place.
Oh yeah.
And you just have to know what they're referring to, or at least know the context of what they're referring to, because often acronyms double up or even triple up in what they're used for.
This is true.
How about mushrooms? We didn't
So
talk about
mushrooms.
mushrooms.
If you're cooking dinner and those little classic button mushrooms that a lot of people put in with different like stir fry type dishes, if you drop a piece and your dog gets a hold of it, that's really not an issue. You want to, of course, always make sure your dog does not have an upset stomach with any of this. Or if you accidentally drop a piece of one of the big like portobello mushrooms, unless it's got onion on it, we don't want onions; those are also bad, and garlic. But if you
Onions,
drop like a piece, that's not a 911 emergency. What is a 911 emergency is if your dog is outside in the yard and they are running around and all of a sudden they grab a mushroom that's growing in the yard. That can be very deadly very quickly. There are multiple types of wild mushrooms. Many of them actually are toxic in different ways. The death cap mushroom is the most well known. Most that typically causes acute liver failure. Some of the others cause neurologic toxicity. Many of them will just have general tummy upset. But your most dangerous ones actually cause liver failure, sometimes kidney failure, but in the case of mushrooms, mostly liver failure.
One of those
And then neurologic.
death cap mushroom.
Yep, that thing right there. And if it's rainy season, like it is here in the US at the moment, because it's springtime, they pop up all over the place, all over the country.
How often I talk about how it rains here all the time in the spring. It's
Yeah.
always raining, the ground's always wet. I think every day we walk to school, there are new patches of mushrooms that are popping up all around the neighborhood. It's amazing.
And those are the ones you don't want your dog to eat.
So if you're taking a walk, walking your dog, and they see a mushroom on the ground, stay away from those, right?
Please don't let them eat it. And if they do eat it, do call your veterinarian.
That's what I was going to ask. What's the step?
Yeah, take a picture of the mushroom if there's multiple ones. Please either take a picture of it or bring it.
You all have cell phones. Pull out your cell phone, take a picture of it.
It helps us so much if you can be like, this is what I have. I'm like, you just saved me so much time.
This is good. So, what if they eat chocolate? How much is too much? When do you take them to the vet? If you know they eat a small chocolate bar and they're a large dog, do you need to worry and rush them to the vet? Or how would you gauge that?
If it's still like dark chocolate, so like your fudge brownies or like a really dark chocolate cake, even in a big dog, I'd definitely call your vet.
Dark chocolate, the amount of cocoa, right?
Yeah, it's at least going to give them a pretty bad stomach ache for the most part. Some dogs are very resilient, doesn't seem to bother them, but always better safe than sorry for sure.
There you go. So there's the advice from the doctor there on when.
Yeah, when in doubt, always call your vet or call a vet ER. None of us mind talking to you about whether you need to come in.
I would say right there, that's clippable, right? The answer for any of these medical questions. If you have any questions about it, you're uncertain, go ahead and give your vet a call, take your animal
Absolutely.
in if they say to bring them in. Simple as that.
Yep.
Yeah, good.
Absolutely.
I think that's fantastic advice. Why do dogs eat grass? It's a little weird. We take them
It is
outside,
weird.
we give them good food inside. Why do they eat the grass?
So, a couple different reasons.
Mhm.
Some dogs, like one of my personal dogs,
Mhm.
he just grazes like a cow. He literally likes to eat grass. He just does. It's him. He's been that way for 13 years.
Just likes the
Um,
grass.
and it's not that his stomach is upset or anything. He just likes grass.
Mhm.
He certainly has no nutrient deficits. In some cases, if you're dealing with a starvation case, you may be dealing with like pica, which is eating things they're not supposed to, like grass because they're hungry or they have a nutrient deficit. Um, as far as eating to make themselves throw up, that is a thing. If your dog does not normally eat grass, like mine, if they start to eat grass, sometimes that can indicate a stomach upset when they get the extra weight. We call it a bolus um, in their stomach and all that roughage.
Mhm.
It
So
helps
this is
them
visible. If you can see the bolus, the
only when
inside
they
of the stomach
vomit it, typically.
when they vomit. Ah, okay. So
So
it's
it
a bolus of
basically creates
food.
like a weight, like a ball like weight, so to speak.
Right. We talk
Um,
about boluses when you chew food. So let's say you chew
yes,
salad. You eat
yes.
salad. You know how it forms a little ball inside of your mouth often, and
Hmm.
sometimes you have trouble just chewing it and swallowing it all, right? That's a bolus, right?
Hmm.
We are designed to chew and process food with our tongues and our teeth to form a bolus to then swallow. Correct?
Yep.
You're the veterinarian, you're the doctor. You tell me if I'm right or wrong. I think
Nope, you're right.
my bio classes. Good.
So in that weight and so forth with all that extra roughage can trigger them to vomit if they do have a stomach upset. So it
The
can
word
range from normal to not normal, depending on your dog.
roughage, the word roughage. What does that mean?
So that's more well, here's another vocabulary word for you. More like fiber. So like things like
Fiber.
your lettuce.
There we go.
Um,
We know this word,
like
I think. This word should be a common word that's easily
yeah, like
understood. Fiber.
whole wheat kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So that it provides more bulk um to create said bolus in the stomach.
There you go. Sounds good. So roughage is fiber,
Yes,
or it's a fibrous bolus, if we say it this way.
correct.
Good.
Yeah,
So these three words, bolus, roughage, fiber, kind of go together, at least in this context and this definition.
yes.
Good. Yeah, excellent. Good. So that's why dogs eat grass. How often should we wash a dog? Now, sometimes we're told that dogs need to maintain a natural coat. Is it safe to give them a bath every day, once a week, once a month? What do you tell people?
That also is kind of a yes no question. So in general, we say don't wash your dog more than like every 2 weeks.
Every two
They
weeks?
do have oils on their skin and their coat that are protective. If you bathe them too much, it will strip their skin of its protection and
Mhm.
you set them up for skin infections and skin problems. um, as a matter of fact, the reactive immune organs in a dog are their skin and their GI tract. So for humans, it's your lungs primarily and your respiratory tract. That's why if you happen to be allergic to shellfish, you can either touch it, eat it, smell it, but all of a sudden you can't breathe. So as opposed to a dog who they'd start vomiting, or their skin would break out really bad. Now in humans, their skin also breaks out, but your primary response is coming from your respiratory system. That's where most of your mast cells and so forth and histamine are located.
Correct me with this. Roughage or riffage?
I would say roughage.
You're
So I guess
saying
it would be
roughage.
one
R
F.
U F F A G
You know
E
I
or R
can't
U F?
spell worth a darn.
Well, this one I'm not sure about because spell checker is saying it's something else. There's refuge. It's not refuge. That
No,
is
it's
not
not
the word
refuge.
we're looking for, but
Hang on. Oh no, I can't use my phone. You're on my phone.
well, well, now it's not doing it, so maybe roughage. This I
Okay.
think is right. I thought RUFFAG is correct, but let me also just double check that just to be sure I'm giving you the right word here. It's an
And
uncommon roach.
in full disclosure of my Southern accent, um, I was trained to spell phonetically, so by ear. I can't spell worth a darn. It's bad,
We're
y'all.
all
Oh, there you
learning
go. That's right.
together.
I can tell you if it's right or wrong. That's right.
We have 120 students, you and me, that's 122 people. We've all learned together how to spell the
How to
word
spell roughage.
roughage. This is not a common word in English. This is something
No,
you
not really.
veterinary medicine, you'll hear in medicine. You might hear
Yeah,
in
and it's
biology.
mostly like a large animal word, like farm animal word. Like we talk about roughage concentrations in cattle in particular, for example. So,
Now that I see it again, I recall it, but again, I don't, well,
yeah.
obviously,
No, I'm like, it doesn't look right, but I
well,
can't tell
no,
you what's wrong with it.
good. Glad we
And
checked.
mine was not an English major. Um, However, if you've got a dog who has a skin issue, so severe allergies, I had a patient the other day, having a severe environmental allergies to pollen right now, and has scratched and broken down that skin barrier and set up, a pretty nasty, both yeast and bacterial infection in the skin. So in those cases, I'm having them do a bath every 2 to 3 days,
2 to 3 days.
because I'm actually using that as a medication and as a treatment.
More
But for
frequent
the
baths
most
would be
part,
at
I'm sorry.
vet's discretion. If the
Hmm.
dog's going to be bathed more often, it's usually because a vet says, look, they have a skin
Right.
condition. This is the treatment. You need to wash them more often. In general, 2 weeks is still the
Yeah.
recommendation.
And that's, and if you don't, Lord, I don't think my dogs have been bathed in 3 or 4 months, to be honest with you.
That was
And
very
that's fine.
subtle what you just said there. I want you to notice. I want y'all to notice what she just said. Lord, I don't think my
Sorry.
dogs have been bathed. No, it's okay. I talk about
That
this in
came out,
class all
didn't
the
it?
time that even my native accent, my natural accent, when I was a
Yeah.
kid, you can watch, maybe, I don't know if Nathan has any videos of us as kids. I don't know. But I used to talk, Daddy, Daddy, I'm over
Yeah.
here. Come on, Daddy. Like that's how I
Yeah.
used to talk. And just because I speak so often on camera and I've done it for
Hmm.
so many years, starting in high school, I've developed this more neutral accent.
Right.
But when I get tired
Yeah.
or when I'm mad at one of my kids,
It comes
that's
out,
when
man.
that country comes out. Girl, you better
It
get over here right
does.
now. Like that comes out. And you know I'm
Right.
mad when that comes out that way. Okay,
Are you
Dr.
waking up
Jessica.
again?
I know, this is one that a few people asked
Right.
this week,
And it's a very fair question.
because we have medical insurance for people. We go to the
Right.
doctor, it doesn't cost us all that much.
Right.
Sometimes we get medical insurance for our pets, and it does cost us a lot. And for some reason, vet care is really expensive.
It
Why?
can be. Yeah.
Why is it so expensive?
That's a multifaceted question.
Try just to
So,
touch on it. We don't have to talk too long about it, but try to
right. So
break it
the
down.
highlights of it are kind of one, something to relate it back to something we said earlier, which was the evolution or progress within veterinary medicine. So there's been a lot of research done within the last 10, 15 years,
Mhm.
20 years, if you want to go that far. And a lot of updated protocols, a lot of, oh, we need to be doing this, this is better. Much of what used to be practiced was actually just extrapolated or borrowed, from human medicine and often was not correct. Um, and so research means that we we change how we're doing things. Well, that typically means that we're going to need different medications. Um, a lot of what we use are actually still human medications. And most of those are generic or not brand name, and that's normally completely fine. Very few medications really truly need to be brand name in veterinary medicine. There are a couple, but they are not the norm. Hello, do you have an opinion about that, sir?
It's weak again.
Um, and so the level at which we practice is different. So It's not every dog that's got a skin issue comes in and gets a steroid shot. It's okay, let's figure out why your dog has a skin issue. Do you have environmental allergies? Do you have food allergies? Do you have something that I need to treat in a different way? And to that end, that means that we use different medications. So that gets more expensive. Historically, because I'm kind of the last of the old generation, so to speak. So this would be the equivalent of like human medicine 30 years ago. So veterinary medicine lags behind human medicine, usually by about 20 years, but as far as this is concerned, probably about 30. With most veterinarians were men. Most veterinarians went out, did their job. They worked 24/7. We didn't have veterinary ERs for small animals, right? Most veterinarians took care of their own. And this is kind of a socioeconomic thing, but most of them had wives at home doing everything. And that's just the way it was. Nothing wrong with it necessarily, but now the majority of your veterinarians are female. And instead of having cheaper care as far as, men just being able to do whatever, and that almost sounds sexist, and it's not meant to, but it does make a difference in this case, that they didn't have to charge for things. Basically, I worked in the first practice I ever worked in was owned by an older vet originally. And he didn't charge people for anything most of the time. And it didn't matter that he didn't, because one, the meds were cheap back then. There weren't that many of them. There was kind of a shoot from the hip protocols most of the time. And they weren't concerned really with having to make sure that their staff and so forth was paid. Because most of the time it was their family working for them. So that didn't really matter. Nowadays, you've got, you don't necessarily have your wife who's not only cooking your meals and being your receptionist and probably trying to be your vet tech at the same time and raise the kids and everything else. You actually have, a full staff that, might have at the clinic I'm at right now. I have 5 different receptionists
to do their job.
Yeah.
So the costs have widened quite a bit.
Very much. And trying to make sure that, the staff is adequately paid. They have to, especially my licensed vet techs, they went to school. They're like nurses.
I think the license and the licensures, the degrees that people have to do these jobs, the degree that you have to have, the time you put into getting. What's the difference? Here's my question then. This is just coming to mind now. How is your education different from someone who goes to medical school to treat humans?
Oh, good question.
What's the big
and this has a role to play actually in cost of veterinary medicine as well, oddly enough. So we, in the United States anyway, and it's different in different parts of the world. So in the United States, for the most part, most of your veterinarians, your human doctors, pharmacists, most of us all went through some type of biology, chemistry type college degree. So that's 4 years. And then if you were real brave, you got minors and other things too. So extra studies, because they want you to be, to stand out. So
stand out and be somewhat well-rounded. I remember
yes. And so they want you to also have studied music and make sure you have your literature exposures. And so it's important. It's actually harder to get into veterinary school than it is to get into medical school.
That's interesting.
So as a rule, typically your veterinarians may actually be smarter than your human doctors. And I can say that because I'm the only veterinarian in my family and the rest of them are doctors and pharmacists. So I say that. So anyhow,
badge of honor.
right, exactly. So now then we go to your professional school. So for us here, you 4 years of like medical school, 4 years of pharmacy school, 4 years of veterinary school. Now for veterinarians, we do not have to go into a residency. So in
key
human
difference.
medicine,
Mhm.
yeah, so human medicine, they go for residencies and fellowships
Mhm.
because all of human medicine is specialized, right?
Mhm.
For the most part. You're okay. And veterinarians are not. We can be, should we want to. But as soon as we graduate, we are allowed to practice.
Mhm.
God help. You better have a good mentor.
Yeah, you have to pull a baby
Because it's
calf out of a mommy cow. And,
right.
yeah, first assignment.
And so the problem until Lord, probably the last five, maybe 10 years,
Mhm.
is that the debt to income ratio for veterinarians
Word.
has been really, really bad.
Mhm.
So our cost of going to vet school is really, really high.
Hi.
The same as medical school, pharmacy school.
Mhm.
And we got paid less than half typically, as a general rule of doctors, pharmacists, and oftentimes maybe 20-25%.
Mhm.
So there was a
Just
huge
about the same amount of
discrepancy.
training and time spent in school, same
Yeah.
amount of, we'll just make it incredibly simple, and this is way oversimplifying it. Intelligence. It takes a very intelligent person to be a vet, doctor, and so on. So it's not like there's any real difference in the courses. There's a word we use in academics, rigor. The rigor of the courses
Yeah.
is still
Yeah.
quite high for veterinarians, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was mostly that, you have student loans in the United States, right?
Yes.
So
We talked about this
you're
too.
okay.
Mhm.
And so trying to pay back those student loans on a minuscule amount of money was really, really hard. And so there has been a shift in the last 10 years of actually making it feasible for veterinarians to actually make a living
Make a living,
doing what they're
pay back
doing,
those loans.
and
Mhm.
also pay all the staff that you need to pay. And then there was COVID, and that messed up our medical supplies and
Long game COVID, yeah.
medications, and I'm not sure we'll ever recover. Uh,
Really had that big of an effect.
oh my God.
I didn't realize it
We
was such a
actually
huge effect
all of
on
veterinary medicine.
medicine.
So the majority of your medications, like IV fluids, for example,
Mhm.
they're made on the same lines, actually in the same production facilities as human. They go through and they do the whole human sterility first, and then they come through and do veterinary, which is more than appropriate because your human stuff needs to be extremely sterile,
Sure.
and clean. Um, but all of our stuff was diverted into human medicine during COVID. Actually, there was um, a lot of surgical equipment, for example, in veterinary medicine, like our ventilators and so forth.
Mhm.
A lot of us have old human equipment. And so they actually sent out a national call for, we need all the veterinarians to bring yeah, all of the equipment back. And so there was lots of veterinarians who actually took their ventilators, which were old human ventilators, to hospitals during COVID and so forth. So it actually was a One Health, multi factorial, so to speak, response. So
Response.
veterinarians were actually involved in that. But our medications all gotten much more expensive. For example, one company this year, I'm so sorry. You're okay, baby.
Hey, don't worry.
One
No,
one company this year
he's being
had
very
a
good.
13% price increase across the board, period. Boom, every medication,
Period.
everything we
Everything's up
order from them,
10%.
done.
Huh.
Yeah. So that's also made it hard. Um, so there's not one straight answer. Um, I do usually recommend people get insurance for their animals. Is that helpful? There you go. Because it does help. Um, or have a savings account or so forth. That helps too.
So yeah, if you're planning to have a pet, you talk about planning to have an animal, you want to make sure you have planned for the animal
Right.
sick or any other problem, have something set aside and not be caught in the dark or not be caught without the backup.
Right.
Mhm. That's good. Yeah, good answers. Good thoughts with these questions. I think I learned a little bit here too. This was really
Yeah.
interesting.
That's what
Yeah.
I'm like. It's not totally a straightforward answer, but
No, it's again, it's a very big question. Why are vets so expensive? Like she said, it's a multifaceted problem.
yeah.
It's quite complex, and you can see from the length of this response and even the other questions I was able to ask her that we could sit and talk about this probably for another
Oh,
hour.
it's a hot topic within veterinary medicine and in
Right.
trying to make it accessible. Like
Mhm.
no one becomes a veterinarian for money. I can
Accessibility.
guarantee you that.
Mhm. You're not
We
getting
become
rich doing
veterinarians because we
this?
want to help.
You're not rich and
And
taking, big expensive trips around the world and buying fancy
no,
clothes? No.
no.
I mean, that's
So it's
another misconception of doctors and, doctors, well, medical providers. Let's just say all
yeah,
of medical providers. Medical school and medical training is very, very expensive in the
it is.
US in particular. We talked about this when we talked about education a few weeks ago. Student
Hmm.
loans. We all have to take out student loans. It's very rare you
Yeah.
meet someone who has not, and paying those back becomes a very large part of your life, especially
Oh, it does. It
trying to
it's very
balance out.
dominating. Very
Yeah.
dominating.
Good. All right, we just
Oh,
have a
come
few
here.
more questions here. If you need to, do you need to stand up with him for a moment or do
Yeah,
anything?
do you mind if I do for just one
No,
second? Sorry,
we
hang
took a
on.
break at the beginning of the last section. Let's do it again here. We'll come back in a
You
minute.
are fighting a nap, buddy. Oh my goodness.
This is not a problem.
Hold on, bud.
All right. So a little break there once again as we enter the third and final section of our interview tonight. Lesson related questions. These are some questions we asked during class. Some of you asked during class, and here is Dr. Jessica's response to them. What is breaking a horse and how do you do it? If you remember at the beginning of this interview, she talked about how she had experience with horses when she was young, and that's one thing that led her to becoming a veterinarian in the end. How does this work? How do you break a horse? How and why even?
So this will have to be, you'll have to cut me off potentially for sure. This is could be like hours long conversation. So breaking a horse
Breaking.
basically means training them as far as taking them from a young horse, typically, who doesn't know anything, may have just had a halter on, so be able to walk around, but not being ridden or any type of work, and teaching them to accept leadership from a human. The old term breaking is considered older because
Older. What do you
it
use?
has some negative uh, associations in the US with rough handling or harsher techniques. Um, but it's not necessarily always meaning that. So most people just refer to it as training, so to
Training
speak
now.
now. So as far as how do you do it? If you do it right, you start it from the second they're born. And by that, I mean, hoping you have a mare or a mama horse who will allow you to take care of her foal with her and teach them to accept pressure, that being touched is not a bad thing because they don't know who you are or what's going on. They just were born. Their instinct is to get up and run. That's what they're designed to do. So teaching them, hey, it's okay for me to touch you, to put a halter on your head. Um, the horses that are the easiest to handle long term have started that literally from the moment they were born.
Mhm.
Then as they get older, you teach them new things, just like you do with an infant. They go through their different milestones. They have to grow. You certainly do not want to start training to ride until they are old enough to support that kind of weight, because that can cause some serious issues, some orthopedic or bone issues if you start that too soon. So a lot of it is just what we call desensitization, which is, hey, this looks really scary, but it's not. So making everything hot. Are you gonna tell us? Are you gonna tell us? You are making it as positive as possible. So that you don't have bad experiences. And then if you do, you back up and start over and try it a different way. And it never stops.
Mhm.
You want to
So
see
it's just
Jake?
a
Here.
series of reinforcing behaviors, would you say? Or is it more than that? Because some people this
It's
week understood
it's
it as,
reinforcing and trying to do it in such a way that your animal, whether that's a horse, a dog, whatever, understands what you're asking. So
hmm,
they speak a different language than you do. So in order to effectively communicate, you need to
education.
communicate in a way they understand and not just the way that you think they should. Um, so using different pressure and release techniques, I like to work my horses at what's called at liberty, which
Mhm,
is working them free in a round pen,
mhm.
and using the same language that a horse would speak to another horse, so to speak, to establish, hey, I want to work with you, but we got to do what I want to do. Um, so it takes years, and you never stop learning and you never stop
For
perfecting.
example, your first horse that you did this with, how long did it
Mhm.
take you to train them to break them?
So I was fortunate. My first horse that I had, he came to me trained in Western discipline, so he could be ridden and so forth. I had to teach him things like dressage and jumping, um, and that was as much teaching me how to do it correctly as anything else, because no horse is ridden the same, just like no dog is trained the same, and you're constantly adapting and making sure that you're communicating well and you're learning from the animal you're working with. um
So it's not just
so
one process, it's different for each animal
yeah,
because they're all
and so
individual, they
there's,
all have their own personalities.
yeah,
And
my sister's mare, I started her from the time she was little, so I actually did teach her how to be ridden and so forth.
mhm,
It takes, some people will say you can do it in 30 days,
and 30.
which is true.
Mhm,
But if you're just trying to be slow and consistent, I took about 8 months. And so the first time somebody got on her, which was not actually me because I was hurt at the time,
mhm.
but it was somebody else who got on her. I had trained her so well. She did a walk, a trot, a canter perfectly, never bucked, never nothing. I mean, it was like she had never missed a beat because I had taken so much time to make sure everything was set up as well as possible. So it's it's always a learning process for everybody, I guess.
The learning process for everybody. So if someone claims they can break a horse in 30 days, it is possible,
It is possible.
but it's
It
probably
tends,
unlikely, you might say.
yeah, it you have to be really consistent. And then
Mhm,
once they're through that training, they typically get sent back home.
mhm,
So their owner really needs to follow up.
mhm,
If they're not being consistent following up, everything that was accomplished in those 30 days just gets
mhm.
lost.
I'm highlighting this 30-day thing because this is a common sales tactic when someone wants to sell you horse
Yeah.
training, horse breaking, dog training, English training. People might say you can become fluent in 30 days. You can
No,
improve your level. Nope, you
there is
say,
nothing that happens
no,
that
you
fast.
can't do it. Yeah. It's you can learn more, you can improve, you can possibly exist in a certain situation and use English in a certain situation well enough, but you're not going to be fluent. You think about all the idioms, all the phrasal verbs that
Yeah,
we learn.
for
How
sure.
many weeks, right? How many weeks have we done thinking classes? Have we done phrasal verbs and idioms? We are still not done, and we are getting closer to being an active club for a year at this point. We still have so many more that we can teach and we can learn. So
Yeah.
again, similar with animals, watch out for those. I call them 30-day scams. Jessica, I don't know if
Yeah.
you do the same, but 30-day scams. Yeah. How about the second question? Why can we domesticate some animals, but not others? This is a heavy question too,
It
but
is.
what are your thoughts
It
about this?
it kind of goes back to like when I was first
Mhm,
talking about the tigers. It's like,
mhm,
yeah, some of them had been exposed to humans. And then there's always like, the TikTok videos or the YouTube where they're like, oh, this bear was raised from a cub and it loved its humans when it saw them 10 years later. Okay, that is not normal.
right.
We
Notice your
like
hand here.
those
This gesture is
stories.
not normal. Hmm.
No, we like those stories and they're really fun, right?
Sure.
But
It
They are
makes a
not
good story.
reality. In reality, that bear is going to eat you.
Yeah, because
They're like,
equally you
oh,
have
look, your
videos
food.
or discussions about the monkey who bit a woman's face off and things like that. Like some animals have this wildness to them that you
Yeah,
don't train out.
right. And it really is genetic. They've actually done quite a bit of work on this.
Mhm.
And
They-
they actually found dog breeds, for example, in thousands and thousands of years that we have domesticated dogs and
Mhm.
created all kinds of dog breeds as a result, was very specific breeding and selecting for different traits.
Mhm.
So that's of course how you create different breeds.
Mhm.
And as a matter of fact, what they ended up selecting for was what's actually called the friendly gene. And
Mhm.
you can actually look that up. The
Literally, the
friendly gene
friendly
is actually what
gene.
dogs have.
Quote that. Mhm. And we
Yep. And
talk
if
about
you
some of
look at
this
a
when we
wild
talk
dog,
about
they don't.
Mendelian genetics and the intro to genetics lesson that I gave, what, 2 weeks ago? We
Mhm.
talked about some of this. So listen to what she's
Yeah,
saying. It directly applies.
it does. I mean, it really is hardwired into their DNA as
Mhm.
to whether or not um, it's they can be domesticated or not. And again, you have the random the random wolf, so to speak, the wild wolf that decides it wants to be around humans. Again, not the norm.
That's an
I have
oddball, we might say. That wolf is an oddball, is the odd,
exactly.
so to
We
say.
would call it a mutant actually, because
Ah,
it
okay.
might carry the friendly gene and it's just a different type of animal.
Okay.
It's not normal. Not that it's a bad thing. People think of mutations as a bad thing. They're not.
So that
As a matter of fact, we
behavior,
select for them.
are you saying that behavior is a genetic mutation?
Yes,
That's fascinating. Okay. I'm not sure I would have known that myself, but that's really interesting. It's so
it is
friendly
actually.
wolf,
So
or we've talked about friendly foxes, and what other animals have you all mentioned? Some other animals also. When you have some that are overly friendly, it's not normal, and there's literally a friendship gene.
and
That's
some of
beautiful.
it's just habitual. For example, like if they're used to being around humans and they're like, oh, I can get food from you,
Okay.
doesn't necessarily mean they can be domesticated or that they have
That's
the friendly
different.
gene,
That
but
habitual
they,
action is different from a domestication or training of
right.
an animal. Hmm,
Do you have an opinion about that, sir?
I think he does. She's
He
still
says
trying to
he,
train him. And our third question from the lesson related questions, should I adopt or buy a pet? What are some problems you've experienced with each? Dr. Jessica. This is our last
okay,
question,
so
everyone.
also try to make that one short.
That's okay.
Full disclosure, I am actually one of the only, well, the only that I know of, canine reproductive veterinarians in South Dakota, Western South Dakota. So what that means is I help people who have specific breeds that we want to continue their genetic lines. So we put them through all kinds of genetic testing and confirmation testing in order to prove that we want to continue their genetics, not that just that they're a good dog or they work well, but that they are structurally sound and so forth. So to that end, I have two purebred dogs and I have two mutts. And so the rule in my house is for every purebred, there's a mutt.
There's a mutt.
And
Like it. So equity,
uh,
there's equity in your household.
exactly. And one of those dogs is actually a stud dog. He's not quite old enough to go through all the testing yet, but he has to earn the right to keep his balls, so to speak. Uh, if you're not
So throw it
willing
out
to
there. And a
improve
stud
that
dog obviously is a male dog that's used to mate and
for breeding,
reproduce. Yes.
he is one of this particular dog is one of the last of an incredible line that took 30 years to create. So he's actually genetically very valuable,
Mhm.
but even so, he still has to go through all of the testing that I require for all the other people that I work with.
Mhm.
So if you buy a puppy, so to speak, I always tell people, please, please, please do your research on any breed that you're doing or you're interested in getting.
Mhm.
Make sure it's a good fit, for one. Two, do your research on breeders. Are they actually breeding so that your eliminating health problems, not continuing them. We always want to breed every litter, improve the breed. That's what I tell people.
And that's an important point. Say
And to
that
that,
one more time. What did you just say?
every litter should improve the breed.
Every litter should improve the breed.
Every time. Every time it should get better, not worse. And that's unfortunately not the case most of the time. But I try to help make that a thing. As far as adopting, my best dog that I ever had, and we call them here in the US, we call them our heart dogs or heart horses. Her name was Coda Bear, and best dog I have ever had, loved her dearly. She was a mutt, she was a Pyrenees Anatolian German Shepherd. And that's a combination of dogs, believe me, that
big dogs,
from a genetic perspective would be a disaster.
All very large and
all big, all very
to
fluffy.
joint problems.
As for guardians, very protective. She was on the kill list at a shelter. No one wanted her because she was an adult. She was about a year. She was picked up as a stray, and she was so scared of humans, she would flatten herself on the ground, shaking, could not be touched, and had to be rehabbed through a lot. She was scared to death of people, violently protective, and had dog aggression issues. We worked through a lot.
And something we talked about this week about the history of different dogs' owners. One reason you would be maybe afraid even to adopt a dog from a shelter is that their history of ownership could have been full of negative experiences. Retrain a dog that's been through all that firsthand isn't an easy thing to do.
It's a lot.
A lot.
But I will tell you that having had dogs that I've had from a pup that had never had any negative experiences at all, they have literally been raised with everything as perfect as it could be, and love them dearly, like this little stud dog, versus like my Coda Bear, that we worked through so much stuff. The relationships that I've had with my animals that I adopted and worked through situations with were stronger than anything that I've had with one that had a perfect upbringing. So but you have to have the resources, the training, the ability. I had a veterinarian who was also a behaviorist, who was one of my professors at the vet school, and she helped me do things with Coda. Everybody at the vet school loved her because my very first year is when I got her, and she had all these issues. And by the time I graduated 4 years later, she taught students. They actually had me bring her in to demonstrate things. She was in multiple research orthopedic studies. Oh my. So she was.
Little boy's been here for a long time, Jessica.
Was the best. He was the best of the best. Oh my.
Good. I think that's the best response I could have asked for to why adopt or the problems with potentially adopting. Again, this is what people talked about this week. We're just wondering what issues they might come across if they did adopt, how much trouble it would be to train them, how many resources they would need to use or spend to care for or to rehabilitate those dogs.
I'll be right back.
That relationship. Say that again. You'll be right back. Okay, sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna take it. Hold on.
Let's take one little break and then we'll say our goodbyes in just a moment. All right, after our last quick break and laying the baby down or giving baby to daddy. Is that what happened?
He decided dad was taking a break from working outside, and I was like,
time
here.
To see daddy. Here we go.
He's bored. Well, and Jessica, he was just as happy as he can be. He's now outside watching birds. He's as happy as he can be.
Fantastic. That's the great thing about living in a place where there's wildlife, right? They entertain the kids. Lily likes to sit outside on some mats I put out on our patio.
Yeah.
And she'll just watch bunny rabbits hop by, birds.
Oh,
loves it. It's adorable to watch her do that. Jessica, I just want to thank you on behalf of myself, but behalf of the entire club. I know that people are going to enjoy watching this video. And I know you've given a lot of really valuable insight, really valuable information, answering their questions and just telling us more about what it's like to be a doctor of veterinary medicine, your profession, the pathway you took getting there, even your as a child, what it was that led you to become a veterinarian. And if anyone has any thoughts, not questions, we'll leave her alone after this, but if you have any thoughts, you want to say thank you yourself, feel free to send a note attached to this video later, and I'll be sure I forward it along to Dr. Jessica, showing your thanks for her taking her time to sit with me and talk to you. Do you have any final thoughts, Jessica? Any capstone remarks before we go?
Yes, I'm very fortunate in the fact that I do get to do what I love to do. And I wouldn't do anything else. There's some times in my career where it's been a lot harder. And there's been, until the last year and a half, almost 2 years, I routinely worked like 80 to 100 hours a week. Which, so it's hard sometimes, especially because we do have a shortage of veterinarians, especially large animal veterinarians in certain areas in the United States, and that's the same around the world. And then came here and went just a small animal. So now my hours are a little more reasonable. And then had little one. So
baby, of course.
So definitely wanting to spend more time with him. But always wanting to do medicine and really always wanting to be a veterinarian, kind of entertaining medicine more for the sake of all the other medical people in my family. But
her medical pedigree. We talked about this word also. Her pedigree.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm very fortunate, and I do love what I do, and I like, my little motto that I have, like on my little sign off is helping people by helping their animals. Because to me, that's what it's about. It's the human relationships as much as the animal relationships, and whether that's working with a farmer on how I can help his cattle be more productive, make sure that we have healthy calves, to a cat that's got allergies but needs help, or a dog that decided to eat something they shouldn't, and I've got to take them to surgery and get it out and quickly before something goes bad. It's always challenging, and it keeps me on my toes all the time.
But again, key, you love what you do.
And I'm very fortunate I get to do that.
Yeah. See, that's how I feel every time I turn on this camera and sit down and record a video or have a class with all of you. And I'm not saying this in jest, and I think all of you know that. How long? I don't know how long this video is yet. There's not a timer, but I know it's long. I planned it to be about 30 minutes. Jessica loves her job. I love my job. You get two people who love what they do together talking about what they do, or me leading her to talk about what she does. We'll talk for hours on end. So again, thank you so much, Jessica, Dr. Jessica, for sitting down and having this long conversation with me. I know our students are going to benefit so much from it. All of you watching, please remember there will be a PDF sheet with just this simple vocabulary list, keeping track of some of the words that she used and some of the words that I know you've asked about throughout the week. Every litter, whatever. Some of these I'll go back and double check. I tried to type quickly. Most of them, I actually think I typed correctly, which is
I think you did.
Amazing.
Except for the roughage thing, and I wasn't sure about that.
Roughage, that was. And again, this
That's
is
terrible, isn't it? Oh my Lord.
I tell them all the time. Just because we're native speakers does not mean we know everything.
No, right? And if you travel anywhere in the world as especially an American English speaker, like when I've spent time in other countries, you become so much more aware of like the turns of phrase or the abbreviations or just expressions that you use, and you're like, that doesn't make any sense at all outside of context of where you're from. It makes absolutely no sense.
Right.
And you become much more aware of it because you're like, how do I
colloquial.
say that without using something that makes no sense to anyone else?
And you'll see me in class, my head's spinning around as I try to decide, okay, what is this colloquial thing I'm trying to say? What's a more common way to say it or an easier way
Hmm.
to say it? Sometimes it's very, very difficult to come up with new words to say because we're so
Hmm.
used to saying it that one way,
Hmm.
right? Excellent.
Definitely.
Great. Well, Jessica, thank you again for sitting down with us. And again,
Well, thank you for giving me a chance to talk about it. I like it.
hey, my pleasure. Anytime. You're welcome anytime. Um, please enjoy your evening with your husband and the baby, and we will catch up later. Everyone else, thank you so much for watching this long video. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have English related questions, send them to me afterwards. I am more than happy to answer any questions you have. And we'll leave, like I said, we'll leave Jessica alone. But if you have some thoughts, if you'd like to send some well wishes her way, send those this way as well, and I will forward them on to her. I'm sure she would love to hear how much you're enjoying watching this video, this interview. Everyone, have a good evening. Thank you. Take care, and I'll see you in class. Bye-bye.
Bye.